it's James here from Guitarist.com, and today I want to share with you my 6 biggest tips for beginner guitarists, or 6 things that every beginner should know. My goal is to help you avoid some of the bad habits and put all your practice time towards some things that'll get you past the barriers that hold people back from being successful on guitar. And the first one is obvious, so I'll make it quick. You should tune your guitar every single time you pick it up. Even the nicest guitars will go slightly out of tune as the temperature in the room shifts, as the strings stretch out over time. And hearing an in-tune instrument is so much more pleasing than an out-of-tune one, especially if you're playing with other people. It's good for your ear's development to hear an in-tune guitar, and it's good practice to be able to tune quickly if you ever want to play in front of others, So please do yourself and everyone a favor and make tuning a regular part of your routine. Now, when it comes to actually playing the guitar, one of the most crucial fundamental skills is to be able to switch chords seamlessly. With precision and accuracy. And it might seem obvious to some of you, but there's a huge difference between knowing a bunch of chord shapes and being able to seamlessly switch between them. I've seen this many times with students. They're wondering why they can't put it all together, and it's because they think that it's good enough to simply memorize where to put their fingers. But that is only half of it. Say you're a visual artist and you have to draw something. It doesn't matter if it takes you 10 seconds or 10 minutes or even 10 hours to draw it. All that matters is that you end up drawing the thing that you're trying to draw. Well, with music, there's this very precise element of timing involved. In order to play a song, you need to be able to switch chords almost instantly. And I've heard people say 1 second per switch. That sounds like a really good goal and a neat way to test it. You write down all the chords that you know on separate pieces of paper. You make some flashcards, then you lay them out in random order. You set your metronome to 60 beats per minute. That's the same as 1 second per click. And then you play the chords. So for example, G, C, D, E minor, A minor. G, C, D, E minor, A minor. And if you can do that and it's clean and comfortable, you're ready to roll. But if you're not at that point, I have something called the chord switching game. I'll put a link in the corner, and it's a separate lesson where we start out with a lot of time to switch, and you get less and less time, but we're doing it with the beat. It's a really systematic way where we get rid of all the other variables. We just work on each chord switch that you need to know, like going from G to C a whole bunch of times, then from G to D and D to C and so on. In fact, I have a couple dozen tutorials with all the most common switches that you can practice along to. It's like a little game. It's part of my free ebook. I'll put a link to that in the corner so you can check it out. Occasionally, I'll hear from members of the Good Guitarist community. They'll say, my fingertips still hurt, even though I've been playing guitar for a couple months. I've heard that this would stop after a couple weeks. Well, when you're first getting started, your main goal is to press the right spots, and you're going to do whatever it takes to make your chords ring clearly and switch between chords seamlessly. Well, the next step after that is to learn exactly how hard to press, because if you're pressing too hard, it's going to do 2 things that you don't want. First, it's going to make your fingertips hurt. Second, it's going to make your strings go out of tune. If you see here, when I press with just enough force, I get a nice clear note. And if I press too hard, you can hear the note bending. So that's why you want to press with just the right amount of force so that you don't raise the pitch of the string and make it go sharp. And this applies not only to chords, but when you're playing melodies as well. And that's why you may have heard people coveting that guitarist who has a light touch. It sounds better. Your hands don't get as tired because you're not working them as hard, so you can play longer and avoid injuring your wrist and your tendons. So I recommend spending some time finding out exactly how hard to press. Make a chord or press down a note and release the pressure. It starts buzzing. That's not enough pressure, right? So you find that sweet spot where it's just enough pressure that it's not buzzing. And it's important to note that the harder you strum or pluck the string, the more force you're going to have to put down in order to prevent the string from buzzing. So you'll want to practice playing soft and loud and everywhere in between. Rhythm is the most fundamental musical skill that everybody must have, regardless of your instrument. Rhythm is what lets us play with one another. You might think, what about the notes? You said my chord shapes need to ring out clearly. And yeah, they do, but that's actually not as important as rhythm. To prove it, let's do a little experiment. I'm going to play a chord progression, and the first time I play it, I'm going to be really, really sloppy. I'm going to play really rough chord shapes. And the second time I play it, I'm going to take the time to make perfect chord shapes. And, I'm going to give them priority over the rhythm. And you judge for yourself what sounds more jarring. What takes you as the listener out of the music. So you could see the first time I did that, I don't even think I made a single chord shape. I was half the time strumming muted and scuffed strings. And, you got to hear the song. You knew that I was humming Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. The second time, though, I was pausing and, making perfect chord shapes, but letting the rhythm fall behind. And I know that was maybe a bit of an extreme example, but it goes to show that rhythm and, keeping it steady is really important. Now, it's not going to be so extreme. Usually it's just going to be one or two little hiccups. But if you are somebody who does suffer from rhythm issues, there's a really simple concept that you need to learn. It's called continuous arm motion. And the idea is your strumming arm keeps moving down and up like a motor the entire song, even when you're not playing anything. It's like a built-in metronome. You could count aloud 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and your arm goes down on the numbers and up on the ands. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and I like to mute the strings just by lightly touching them, and that makes the attack, the exact moment that my pick touches the strings, really short, and it's easy to hear the rhythm that way, and you just get super used to doing that, just going and counting 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and over and over. You could even do that along to songs. You just put on any song you like, you mute the strings, that way you don't have to know the chords, and then you just strum down and up with continuous arm motion with the beat of the song. And from here, when it comes to actual strumming patterns, every single strumming pattern is just this down up thing, but you're missing sometimes. That's all a pattern is. When it comes to adding the chord shapes, the strumming takes priority. Even if you miss the switch, you keep that arm going. What a lot of people do is they let their chord switching hand interrupt their strumming. Even if their rhythm is really good, they'll still pause that rhythm so they can get the chord switch perfect. And that isn't worth it. Just let the chord switch be a little bit off, but keep the rhythm going. Another thing that'll make the biggest difference is learning how to mute the excess strings. When you're strumming guitar, you want to keep your arm doing that continuous motion thing. But another problem arises. There are certain chords where the thicker strings ruin the sound of the chord. Like when you're playing the D chord, if you hit the thickest string, it really sours the sound of it, and some people might try to avoid hitting that string. And that's a valid strategy, but when you're avoiding that string, it can mess with the flow of your strumming and the overall feel of it, because some chords are using all the strings and some chords are using some strings. So a better solution is to mute the excess strings and keep your strumming arm going with the exact same motion, regardless of how many strings your chord shape is using. And you can do that either by putting your thumb over the top and lightly touching the thickest string. You know, on my D chord here, I mute the thickest string and then I can just strum all the strings freely. Another common one is the C chord, and for this one, your finger is already playing the A string, so you can just put it a little bit higher than usual so that it lightly touches the underside of the thickest string, and that mutes it too. You know, and when you're playing melodies, or if you're playing some like funky rhythm, you might want to try playing it with your other 3 fingers. And it just works. It makes the guitar easy mode. Now, if you're playing electric guitar, you should definitely spend a good chunk of your time plugged in and setting your amp as loud as you can comfortably go. I found myself in a situation where I played electric guitar without an amp a lot, and it gave me 2 bad habits. One, it made me play a lot harder in order to hear myself because, you know, electric guitars aren't as quiet or aren't as loud as acoustic guitars. And I was over pressing the strings and tiring out my hands quicker. And 2, I couldn't hear all those unwanted clicks and, you know, little harmonics and stuff like that. Eventually, I got an amp with headphones, and that allowed me to play softly and still hear everything. You know, it forced me to clean up my playing. And whether you're playing acoustic or electric, you want to really listen to yourself playing and iron out those issues, especially if you want to start playing live and recording. You know, when you record, you'll hear every little string squeak, and it'll be really demotivating, you know, and that brings us to our final tip: to listen actively. One of the most critical skills for a beginner is learning to listen, and I mean really listening. You know, when we listen to our favorite songs, we generally do what's called passive listening. You're enjoying the song for what it is as a whole, and that's great. You know, that's what makes you love music in the first place. But you can do something called active listening, and that's where you're listening and you're asking questions like, what instruments can I hear right now? You know, what's the guitar doing? Oh, there's 2 guitars. Is that an electric or an acoustic? What's the bass line sound like? You know, what's the drum beat sound like? Are they singing harmonies on that part? You know, and when you're actively listening, you're basically asking questions in your head and trying to figure out what the song is made up of. And it does take away a little bit of the magic from the song, you know, because you're analyzing it. But it is a part of your role as a guitarist and, you know, learning how guitar fits into the music. And we can take that same skill, active listening, and we can apply that to hearing ourselves play. You know, there are many different things that you can listen for and that you'll discover over time, depending on where your musical journey takes you. But the 2 biggest things that you want to listen for as a beginner or as somebody looking to move past the basics are your rhythm and your tone. And we already discussed rhythm, but as for tone, when I say tone, there's a few factors. You know, there's your volume, you know, how loud or how soft you are any notes jumping out, like are you playing that chord or a bit louder than the others, you know, how and where you pluck the strings, all the different ways that your hands are interacting with the guitar. For me, personally, when I was first told about this, I thought I sounded good. And then I really started listening to myself. In fact, I recorded myself so that I could listen back because in the moment when you're playing guitar, your brain kind of fills in all the bits. You know, if there's some note that's too quiet, your brain plays the note in your head for you and it makes it sound wonderful. You know, it smooths it all out. But when you listen back to a recording, you really hear what you sound like. And for me, the way that I had my pick turned, it made a scraping sound. You know, so I learned to hold my pick parallel to the string to get a nice clean pluck, you know, and a bunch of little things like that. You know, it's not all these huge things, but it's a bunch of little things that make a huge difference. You know, your hammer-ons being a little bit too quiet, your bends being a little bit out of tune. You know, ironing out all those imperfections makes a way bigger difference than learning another scale or another chord shape. You know, when you improve your rhythm and your tone, you're improving every single thing that you can already play. And it's the fastest way to bring the quality of your playing to the next level. So those are my 6 shortcuts or things to focus on as a newer guitar player. If you want some guided practice, a way to apply these things right away and see improvement in your switching, rhythm, tone, and every other critical aspect of playing guitar, I have that free ebook that I mentioned earlier. It goes over everything we discussed here and more. It's completely free for all my subscribers. There's a link in the corner and down below. I also have a complete beginner's course, which has all the same stuff, but expanded upon. And we attack each issue from every possible angle, but have a lot of fun doing it, learning songs along the way. There's links for that too. Otherwise, have a fun time practicing, and I'll see you soon.